Well, welcome everybody. We're so thrilled that you're here with us tonight. Tonight, we're talking about getting it done, executive function hacks for boosting your child's productivity. Kathleen, thank you so much for having me this evening.
Oh, thanks, Anne. We love kicking the year off with Ann Dolin. Anne always helps us get our school year off to a terrific start. And should I go ahead and just say a couple of words about the PRC and then introduce you?
Absolutely. Yes.
So, for those of you who might be new to Arlington Public Schools or our Parent Resource Center, my name is Kathleen Donovan. I have the great privilege of working at the PRC, where we collaborate with and learn from and with families of students, primarily those with learning needs. So I'm going to put in a moment just some contact information in the chat along with our supports and services, but please let us know how we can support your work with your teams in your schools this year and support your parenting with your children. So as I said, we're always thrilled when Anne can squeeze us into her busy schedule. Anne has a very strong conviction that school doesn't have to place stress on children and parents. Based on her nearly 30 years of experience, she's developed practical strategies that she shares to help kids succeed and make the most of their academic journey. Anne has a degree in child psychology and a master's in special education. She's a former public school teacher, a mother of two, an author, and advocate for children with ADHD and learning issues. She founded Educational Connections in 1998, tutoring one student at her dining room table. And I know it's grown a lot since then. Today, her company has grown to employ 120 tutors, executive function coaches, and college consultants who provide virtual support to students K through 12 in the DC area and beyond. Anne's also the author of the award-winning book, Homework Made Simple: Tips, Tools, and Solutions for Stress-Free Homework, and her latest book, Getting Past Procrastination: How to Get Your Kids Organized, Focused, and Motivated Without Being the Bad Guy. So Anne, thank you for coming. I'm going to turn it over to you to share your knowledge and wisdom with us.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. I love talking to parents at the Arlington PRC. So let's get started. I wanted to share with you a little bit about what I hear. Every day, parents call our office and they're looking for help for their kids. Typically, they call about concerns with ADHD or executive function issues, which is kind of like a new word for study habits. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And sometimes they call for more complicated things like physics and calculus. But when it comes to those executive function issues, I'm curious, what is your top concern? Why did you come tonight? What's keeping you up at night? What's been hard in your household? So you're going to see a poll pop up, and I would love to know. Is your top concern that your child seems unaware of what's going on, what he has to do? Is it that he knows what to do, but he can't keep track of the deadlines? Is it organization and planning that's really getting in his or her way? Or is it procrastination? If you don't mind putting your answer in, that would be fabulous. And we can take a look at the results in just a second. It looks like organization and planning is leading the way, followed by procrastination. Interesting. Oh, thank you so much to everybody that's participating. This is awesome to see all the votes. All right, well, it looks like organization and planning is the biggest issue for this evening, followed by procrastination, and then keeping track of those deadlines. And some parents say that their child seems unaware of what's going on and what they have to do. That is so helpful to me. We see this in my own practice all the time. In fact, that is, you're kind of with all the parents out there that call us. These are the things that are keeping their kids up at night, specifically with organization and planning. So I'm going to focus on that a wee bit more than some of the other things in terms of keeping track of deadlines and procrastination as well. So let's get started. I know what your top concern is, and I will address it along the way this evening because it relates to something we call executive functions. Executive functions are basically these cognitive processes in the frontal lobe of your brain. Turns out they're really, really, really important for school success because they have to do with things like batting away distractions, getting started on a task. Oh, not just knowing what you have to do, but kind of setting up a little plan for yourself, prioritizing what you're going to do first, second, third, and then actually the execution it takes to get that done. to sustaining your effort to finish it. We also see things like self-monitoring, knowing when you're off track and self-correcting, working memory, juggling lots of things in your head, shifting, putting down one thing and starting another. Materials organization, if it were 5 or 10 years ago, I would say it's more like backpacks, binders, folders. These days, it's about digital files. So in hearing all of this, what I often hear from parents is, oh, that kind of sounds like ADHD. What is the difference? They're super similar, actually. So ADHD stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And there are 3 types. There is the hyperactive type, and these are kids that seem like they have a motor in them. Oftentimes they're impulsive, calling out in class. That part tends to get better as kids get older, though. We also have the type that's more inattentive. So they're not behavior problems. In fact, they kind of maybe appear a little bit spacey. Sometimes the teacher even thinks they're paying attention in class, but they're really not. So they get home to do their homework and they're not quite sure what to do. And then lastly is combined type. That's when we see a little bit of the hyperactive and the inattentive combined together. In my practice, far and away, we see more inattentive and combined type kids. Now, here is the difference with executive function. Every student who has a diagnosis of ADHD also has executive function weaknesses, but there are a lot of kids out there that have these weaknesses in executive function, and they don't meet the diagnostic criteria of ADHD. But honestly, it doesn't matter, because if a child is struggling with these things, like staying focused, executing, getting things done on time, we're going to treat them. We're going to say, all right, let's whip out some strategies and help them along the way. So at Educational Connections, in my practice, we really take a team approach to academics. And we believe that the parent's main role is that of the encourager. We're going to talk a lot about this tonight. Their main role is kind of on the sidelines, encouraging their kids, making sure the environment is ripe for motivation and for focus, but not actually sitting with the child and doing the work, getting involved in the minutia. That's kind of where relationships get really fractured. That's our role. We get in there, we work on study habits and executive functions, and that can be the case in your house. It doesn't have to be you who does all these things. It could be a professional, like an executive function coach. It could be, a college student down the street. It could be that your child stays after school and gets extra help from the teacher. But often when we talk to parents, we hear that their child may not be invested in change. They may know they have difficulty in specific areas, but they're not so willing to change, and they definitely don't want to listen to the parents. So we hear that all the time from parents, and we work with kids that are willing to change and that sometimes don't see the problem. So as a coach in my practice, our main goal to get started is determining where the student is willing to accept help. Because sometimes a parent will call us and say, oh, he's not writing down his assignments. He doesn't really know what he has to do. Everything's so last minute. I'm just really tired of it. And then we'll start working with the student and we'll say, hey, tell me about how you record your assignments. Or I'm going to show you a quiz in a second that we give kids. And that kid doesn't see a problem with it at all. They don't have an issue, but they may accept help from in another way. So those are the kids that sometimes cause a lot of friction at home. As parents, we try to force help in the wrong way on them. Here's the reason. There's something called the stages of behavior change. It's based on this model called the trans-theoretical model. So anytime a human being wants to change, it could be you want to stop drinking. Maybe you want to lose weight. In a student's case, it could be that they need to start writing down what they have to do so they know how to prioritize their assignments every day. Kids come to us at all different places on this ladder. At the very beginning, which is what I mentioned earlier, pre-contemplation. No way, I won't change. Sometimes they come in as, I don't know, it's not really a problem, but maybe. I'll change my habits. Or, "Oh, yeah, this is a problem and I'm sick of feeling like this. Starting tomorrow, I'm going to try a new way." Or each day, I'm going to do this. I'm building a new habit. And then lastly, okay, I've done this for a while. It's working great. Now I have a new way of doing things. So how do we, as parents and professionals, determine where our kids are? One way is to use a self-assessment. And I'm going to send this to you if you think it would be helpful for your child. And what I've done in creating the self-assessment is I've broken down different issues that kids face throughout their school career, like recording daily assignments, preparing for a test, managing work and activities, keeping track of digital assignments. And there's lots of things. And in this assessment, we do this with kids, and the first time we meet them, we do it together and we ask them lots of questions. So on this skill, tell me about that. How are you feeling about that? And we ask them the answers here. I know it's hard to see, but really we get into where they are in the stages of change. Because what we find, as I mentioned earlier, is some kids are willing to change and others aren't. And when they aren't, that's okay. Our goal is to build trust. Our goal as parents is to build trust. And so we want to find another way around it. Maybe they won't let us help with the recording assignments, but they really want to get a good grade on the next test, and they're willing to let us help them study for that test. So whenever we work with kids, and I would suggest anytime we talk to kids as parents, we want to use the read the room approach. Kind of like a cocktail party. You wouldn't just barge into a cocktail party and like find somebody to talk to. No, you would kind of look around the room, look who smiles at you a little bit, and then you might go up and introduce yourself because you feel comfortable with that person. You kind of take a subtle, soft approach. Same thing with kids. When we start sessions with kids, we want to get their buy-in. So we'll ask questions like, "Oh, would you mind if I shared my thoughts on this?" Or, "Would it be okay? Would it be an okay day for us to take a look at this?" Or, "Oh, we worked on this technique. Could you see yourself actually using this in the future?" I love these questions because it really gets kids buy-in into using strategies, and it really, allows them to kind of open the door to us so that we can help them. We also build communication by what not to say. And I know I've said this a lot as a parent, the did you questions. Did you do your homework? Did you study for that test? Did you turn those test corrections in? Did you go to see your teacher after school for extra help? Did you? Those questions put kids on the defensive. They don't love them. So instead of did you questions, I would get those out of your vocabulary. We never will use those when we work with kids. They don't help. Instead, we ask those questions before. Do you mind if we talk about this? Oh, what about this strategy? But we also kind of try to normalize feelings that kids are having. And oftentimes, kids will say, "My teacher, she's the worst. It's so unfair. She gives more homework than all the other biology teachers." And, we might say something like, "You know what, you're right." We'll empathize with them and say, "You're right, that she is a hard teacher." But what I found in working with other students is that they have a lot of homework too. I bet in your class, there are other kids that are feeling this way. So we try to normalize situations like you're not the only one. We empathize instead of negating their feelings. We don't have to agree with him, but we want to empathize. And we do that because we really want them to co-own their issues with us. We don't want them to think that we're going to do things for them or that they're completely on their own. They need to take their part of responsibility. So another thing we do is to improve mindset. You may have heard of this thing called growth mindset. So there's growth mindset and there's fixed mindset, and growth mindset is really good. This means that kids have this idea that they can improve and get better. Fixed mindset is when kids think, "Why bother? I'm going to always stink at this," or "I'm never going to get a good grade, so I'm just not going to study. Oh, I don't need to turn that in." We want to go towards growth mindset. So what can we do as adults to help kids? Well, when we work with kids, we always give specific feedback. Great job. Kids do not believe it. When we say great job, kids think we're not really listening to them, or we haven't really even looked at their work. How about this? What if when you're looking at your child's essay, you say something more specific? So we'll say something like, that introduction really makes me want to read more of your paper. I thought that first point was really interesting. Now, if you're a kid, wouldn't you want to hear that? That feels great. Somebody took the time to read your work and they thought it was interesting. I bet you're going to want to write more. We also ask open-ended questions. Oh, what a good idea. Tell me more about that. What made you think of it like that? Keep going. I like it. Interesting. What makes you say that? Oh, I like that idea. How would it work if you did that? I like these questions because they actually start to like fire up those executive function skills and get kids thinking for themselves instead of us telling kids what to do. Nobody likes to be told what to do, and kids, they don't like it either. So when you're thinking of working, when we think of working with kids, we think of things that can be beneficial to the whole family. For example, outside help, whether it be that college student down the street, the teacher, a professional like what we do. We believe that taking parents out of the equation is key. Not totally. Like a parent still wants to make sure they have an area to do the work. They're encouraging them from the sidelines. I'm going to give you a few strategies in just a few minutes. But the reason that outside help is beneficial to kids is that there's not a lot of emotional turmoil with the parent over the work. And when you have this type of structure set up, it's also helpful that the child is getting their work done. And I'll talk a little bit about this as well in just a moment, but we believe that skill-based learning, like teaching executive function skills to kids with EF issues and ADHD, does not work in a vacuum. It doesn't work for somebody to teach its skills in isolation. They have to be taught in tandem with their work. So you wouldn't want to say, hey, here's a good strategy for memory. Kids won't buy it. But if you say, oh, could this strategy work for memorizing these science vocabulary words? Let's practice it. That way they're applying it to their work, and that's what works. Also, it helps kids not only learn strategies and get their work done, but that really increases their motivation when they're turning in more of their work. In fact, some research shows that kids with ADHD turn in 13% fewer assignments than kids without ADHD. And over time, that really manifests itself in lower grades. So if we can help you, we are more than happy to have a conversation. I have 3 specialists that work with kids just on executive functions. Kathy and Ann Stewart, and all of my staff at Educational Connections can help, but these folks in particular, and Jennifer, would be really good choices to talk to. And if you would like to talk about what's going on with your child, even just to share ideas and ask, are these things normal? We're happy to chat with you. And you can hold up your phone and scan that QR code, and it will go right to Kathy, Jennifer, and Stewart's calendar. All right, so in the beginning, you mentioned that organization and planning were really important. Organization is not just for stuff, but organization is for time as well. And we work with a lot of kids that have this issue called time blind, meaning they have really good intentions. They want to do a good job. Their teacher at school may have told them about a strategy. They know kind of how to do it. They just can't get it done because they're time blind. They're in the now, and looking at things in the future is really, really hard for them. That's why they are so last minute. And it's frustrating, and we think like maybe they're lazy or unmotivated, but it's not. They're not. It's part of the disorder. So we try to take kids that are time blind and teach them other strategies. And I like making anything we do tied to a visual. This is one strategy we use where we teach kids how to manage their time and prioritize their assignments with food. I mean, who doesn't love food? So we'll teach them instead of, oh, this is a big assignment, it's going to take a long time, or this won't take that long. We associate it with food. So there are assignments that are bites, and bites are little things that kids have to do. Like it might be submit a question of the day to your Google Classroom, or email your biology teacher about extra help on Tuesday, review the history Quizlet. A muncher is more work. A muncher takes maybe an hour or even a little bit more. And that might be, if you're a high school student, Cornell notes and a history on your history chapter, or doing that lab report in biology. But a gobbler is something that you have to do over time. Like you can't just do it the night before in an hour. It might take you more time to get it done. So for example, an elementary student, a gobbler would be a book report. You have to read the book and then take all these steps. Could be an English lit essay for an older student, or maybe a digital arts project. So we'll ask kids, is this a bite, a muncher, or a gobbler? And we try to get them to think in terms of time, as how long will this task take? So we use this worksheet. It's called a map, and I really like it because it has task time map. So this is what we use every time we work with kids, ideally a couple times a week. So it has the task. So we'll go through, I'll talk about this in a second, but we're going to go through their portal with them, like their Canvas or the Schoology, and figure out, all right, let's figure out what you've got going on today and this week. Oh, you have a reading log. How long do you think it might take you to do that reading log? Oh, 30 minutes. Great. Let's jot that down. All right. When would be a good time to get that reading log done? Oh, maybe 7:50 to 8:20. So we do this for their assignments for the week. And we'll even schedule in things that are also time consuming. Like you can see the middle of this, baseball practice. It's 2 hours. It's Thursday from 5 to 7. I like this a lot because it helps kids get everything that's swirling around in their head onto paper. And then what we do with this is really different for every student. Some students will just use this and they'll tape it up on their whiteboard in their homework area. Maybe they'll put it in their binder, they'll take a picture of it and use it. Sometimes kids will take the map part and they'll populate it into their Canvas calendar or into their Google Calendar. Some kids will put it in their phone and use the calendar on their phone. So kids, we let them dictate what works for them, and then we'll monitor it. Let's see how this is working, because they might think it will work, maybe it doesn't, but we'll monitor and see how it goes, and we tweak things as we go along. But consistency is key. So with kids with ADHD and executive function weakness, if they learn something once or twice, do not expect that they're going to do this on their own. It will not happen. They need to do things over and over and over again so that it becomes a habit, and it becomes, a routine, and later on a habit. So anytime kids get help, really about twice a week is ideal. Once a week is super helpful, but sometimes things can fall through the cracks once a week. But really, consistency, having these regular sessions, whether it could be with you, if your child is working with you, is willing to work with you, or somebody else, making sure it's really the same times each week, and that there's always somebody there to provide accountability. In our sessions, we make sure that the stuff gets done. So we'll always follow these 4 steps. All of our executive function coaches follow these 4 steps. And some of this can be extrapolated to what you do at home. Some kids, again, will allow it. Some kids will say, no way, I want to do this on my own, or somebody else can help me. So the first step is always to check the student's LMS, which is their learning management system. So it could be Canvas, it could be something else. And we'll log on with the student and say, oh, let's see, how's it going in your digital arts class? Let's take a look at your English class. How about history? And when we hear things like, oh, I did that, I turned it in, I don't know why it's on there, we don't have to do that anymore. Or whatever it might be. Usually it's, I turned it in already. We use a trust but verify method. That's amazing. Oh, perfect. Can you show it to me just so I can be sure? So the first step is to go through each class and determine what's due. The second step is to have students write these things down. So we want to make sure that they're writing down what they have to do, whether it's an upcoming assignment or it's a test. And you can see the student using a whiteboard. I'm a huge fan of whiteboards. I think they're super helpful for kids to have in their space. And when we work with kids, it's one thing we initially suggest. Just getting a small one at first is fine and using Post-it notes. But again, having that visual is super helpful. Then we'll ask kids, all right, so we have a plan. We might have a map at this point. What is the assignment that you really do not want to do, that you do this assignment, you're just not going to do it on your own? Everybody has one. And that's where we usually start with kids. We'll make sure that they're able to get it done. And so we will often work through that assignment. For kids with ADHD, because working memory is such a big issue. And by the way, working memory isn't short term, it's not long term, it's juggling multiple things in your head. So writing is often impacted. Kids don't like to write. They don't want to hold a pencil anymore. So if you think of it in terms of, oh, I have to write down something meaningful. I have to use good vocabulary words. I need to have proper grammar. What about punctuation? Do I have a capital letter? Will my teacher like this? All these things are swirling in your head when you're writing. So often it's that we'll work with kids on writing, but it's a little bit different for every student, but we want to make sure their hardest things get done. And then at the end of the session, and this is my absolute favorite part, we'll ask kids, what was helpful to you? What was a strategy we used that you liked, that you could see yourself continuing to use? And then the best part is saying, where might you get stuck this week? And practicing where a student can get stuck, because they all will. And the difficulty with a lot of our kids is when they get stuck, or when they don't know what to do, or when something feels hard, they will give up, or they won't do it, or they'll avoid something. So we'll say to them, you mentioned, so you have in your map that you're going to review those math problems to study for your quiz on Tuesday and on Wednesday and Thursday night. What could get in your way? Oh, I hate math. I don't know. I could watch YouTube videos. So we'll say, what happens when you don't want to do this? What might you do? And troubleshooting before something happens is so, so valuable, because often when you talk it out with a kid, they can solve their problem before it even starts. An example of that we teach kids to use timers. I love timers. I've always been a fan. We use them with kids from kindergarten and a lot as kids get older through college. So a timer can be used just to help yourself get started. You don't want to do that math. Okay, what about this? Would you set a timer for 10 minutes? We call it the tolerable 10. Anybody can tolerate anything for just 10 minutes. Could that work? Or for older kids, high school and even college students, even middle school students can benefit this. There's something called the Pomodoro method. And this is based on research that the sweet spot for getting something done, especially if you don't want to do it, this goes for adults too, that set point is 25 minutes. So we'll teach kids to set the timer for a longer period of time if they have to get a gobbler done, for example, or a muncher, and set the timer for 25 minutes, work as hard as they can, focus as much as they can, and then they can take a break after that 25 minutes and they can set it again. So those are just strategies we use when we're helping kids predict that they're going to get in trouble along the way and problem solve before it happens. So I talked about time blind. What about those kids that have difficulty planning and staying organized? We found that anytime we can help kids preview the week, it's really beneficial. And you can do this in your home too. So you might sit down with your kids. Wouldn't this be amazing if all families looked like this? Seriously though, you can have time, Sunday, for example, for 15 minutes after dinner, where it's not just your kid who's disorganized who you're talking to, it's everybody in the family. It could be during dinner time, and you might just say, oh, let's talk about the week ahead. So what I recommend for younger kids, elementary school kids, is to have a weekly calendar. It looks something like this, and to put it on your fridge. And I like weekly because just having something for the day is too short-sighted. A month is like really far out and long, but a week is just right. So you put the week on calendar on your refrigerator, and early on, it could be like, I don't know, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, even Monday. You say, hey, let's look at the week that's coming up. And if your child has no homework in elementary school, you're going to put stuff on here that has to do with their extracurriculars. And the reason you want to do this is because if you don't, your child will think in the now and won't get in the habit of preparing early and looking ahead. Now, if your child has homework and they're still in elementary school, you might say, oh, can you take out your laptop? Check to see, what do you have coming up? Look at your assignment notebook. These are things that are bigger, like tests, quizzes, book reports type of things. Those can go on the calendar too. And I made a template for you, and you can download this for free. You can go to our website, which is ectutoring.com/Sunday-sessions to get it. But I'm also going to send it out to you. So I've recorded this tonight, and I'm going to send you out a recording with some free things like this that you can use in your home. Now, for older kids, you might just ask the question, hey, what's your week looking like? And that's their cue to open their laptop and look at the week ahead. And the reason this is helpful for older kids is because they're often on block scheduling. And if they haven't planned ahead and they get to school on Monday and something's due on Monday and they haven't really thought about it, they're already starting the week behind. And that is no fun for anybody. So the goal is to look, okay, what do I have going on this week? Is there anything I can do now to prepare? These are strategies that we use with kids because we want them to be feeling ready, confident, on task. Now, similarly to managing time, you can also manage stuff. And our kids have a lot of stuff, not as much stuff as they had 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but they still got stuff. So this idea of thinking ahead, you can also help your kids to think about, what can I do tonight that's going to save me time tomorrow? And that's where the launching pad enters. And the launching pad is just a bin or a box, any container, and it goes by the door from which your child is going to exit in the morning. And the idea is that all the kids in your family, even you can get ready for the next day. You set aside time each night to get the launching pads ready. That means your binders in your backpack, your folders are in your binder, your binders in your backpack's in your launching pad. So anything else you need, like your soccer uniform or your viola. But the idea is getting ready at night to launch into a new day the next morning in an organized fashion. It could even be laying out your clothes for the next day. So ideally, what we want to do as a team is to help kids be more organized and to plan ahead. So parents can do that on their end by setting the stage with these strategies. And then somebody else can get in there with the minutia of the hard work, teaching those executive function skills. Because ultimately, it's everybody who's in on the action. It's kind of like a soccer game. If you're a soccer mom, you could stand on the sidelines and cheer for your child, or you could run on the field and play the game with them. We don't want to play the game with them. It's the same thing with schoolwork. We want to be the encourager on the sidelines. So what I'd love to do as we wrap up tonight is go to Q&A in just a moment. So if you have a question, please throw it in the chat. And I want to let you know, we're here to help. If we can assist you at all this school year, if you just want to talk about your child, we're happy to assist. And you can schedule a free consultation by scanning this QR code. So I'd love to go to Q&A right now. And after the Q&A, we're going to have about 15 minutes for it. There will be a survey that pops up on your screen. And this is super helpful to me. If you can look at the survey and tell me what was helpful for you, what you'd like to see more of or learn more of in the future, that would be amazing. So thank you for that. All right, Kathleen, anything that you want to share before I go to the chat, or should I just go to the chat?
No, I think, Anne, let's go ahead and hear what the questions are.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right. Sure. So with the first example, what they do when they get to 8:20 and didn't finish the first one, do you move on and start late the next day, or what is the approach? So Rhiannon asked, I think you're talking about the math, Rhiannon. If they don't do the first thing that's scheduled on their calendar, what do you do? That happens all the time. You know, in a perfect world, kids are going to put things on their calendar and they're always going to do them. So we'll troubleshoot with kids and ask, you know, beforehand, what will you do if this happens? And usually what they say is, I'll adjust the time. What we've also found is that if something's really hard for kids, they won't do it, or they'll keep moving one particular thing. And it's a sign for you when you keep moving something, or like for us as adults, you know, when we have the same thing on our to-do list all the time, it's a sign that it's too difficult for us to do alone, or we're just not going to do it, and maybe just take it off of the list, or maybe it's not that important after all. So we're always talking to kids about that. But in general, what I would say is you just redo the times and you change the times. Or if the task feels too hard for you and you don't have help, make the task easier. If it is something like read chapters 13 through 17, it may not be attainable, and you can change it to just read chapter 13. Should I be concerned that my child does not do it well on the SOLs, but does fine in school? We also see that this is a common issue. Kids that are poor test takers, but they have good grades. And the reason they have good grades, there's a couple of reasons. The first reason is that they're willing to work hard and they will go the extra mile. So they'll study for tests, they'll turn in their homework. They are able to do the day-to-day work, but what's really hard for them is retaining that over time and cumulative tests. That's why in high school, we see kids that are great students and do very poorly on the SAT and ACT. It's certainly not uncommon. The other issue is grade inflation. When we were kids, the most awarded grade was a B, and just getting a C meant your average. That's not the case anymore. Now, the most awarded grade is an A. And I would argue when you have a B in a cumulative subject where one skill builds upon another, like math, a math-based science as you get older, chemistry, physics, or a foreign language, it means that you may not understand the work. We get calls from parents all the time and they'll say, you know, my child asked for a tutor in math, and we'll say, tell me what's going on. How are they doing? And they'll say, well, they have a B. But a B, you know, the B may be because you're a hard worker, but you still may not have full mastery over it. So if they're not doing, I would probably dig deeper, Robin. I'm happy to talk to you about this, but I would dig deeper to see, number one, what SOL is it? Is it a cumulative subject or not? And then maybe over the summer, get some remediation in that subject area to get your child back on track. What to do when they say, I know? It seems like they know everything, but they don't. I would say, this is to Bola, maybe, you know, tell me about that. Oh, you mentioned that. How do you know that? What have you done that makes you think that you're all set? I'm just curious. Not asking to, you know, really be difficult or to put them in a corner. That's not the goal, but it's really just out of curiosity to find out more. Because I will tell you, a lot of kids think that they know things. They think that they have it all figured out. They think, you know, one that I hear a lot is, I studied for that test. but they are sideline studiers. And a sideline studier is a kid that thinks he studied because he takes his notes and reads through them a couple times and, announces, I've studied. But that's not how you study. You study by taking your notes and asking yourself questions from the notes. In math, you study by taking practice problems and doing them on your own and looking back at the examples as you get stuck. So you're like practicing, you're in the game. When you're a sideline studier, you're just a passive studier, you're on the sidelines. So I might ask like, oh, tell me a little bit more about that. And I wouldn't worry about it. If your child isn't overly verbal, and most kids aren't, it's okay. I would just still take that role of the encourager in supporting them as they go along. Cherie says, after being on virtual instruction for 2 years, my son has become tone deaf to my voice. What are some ways I can get him to re-engage and implement these tools at home? I would say that to your child. Whatever his name is, Jimmy, I can tell that I talk at you a lot and I don't want to do that anymore. Have you noticed that too? And he's going to say, yeah, I have, Mom. And say, I'd love to talk. I'd love to find another way for us to communicate, because our relationship is really important and I don't want it to be defined by academics. And sometimes just having that genuine conversation with kids, it makes them feel better. But it takes time to reestablish the relationship. Also, kids with ADHD, I read a study that 80% of the feedback they get in school is negative and only 20% is positive. So if at home, it's so easy to go down the negative route when our kids aren't doing well. Like it really is. I have 2 kids with ADHD. I totally get it. But as much as we can, be on the sidelines, encouraging, and just asking questions, not too many questions, because then they're going to be like, stop it with the questions. That will help to re-engage the relationship. I have the opposite kid. He tests well, but doesn't get great grades. Any advice? Well, it's likely that he has mastered the content if he's getting good test grades, but maybe isn't putting forth the effort on the homework. Or some of the in-class assignments, depending on the grade. So with most elementary kids are getting in-class assignments, other kids have homework. So it may be that he's not doing the work, or he's not doing the work well. He's putting forth very little effort. And so for that type of student, I would not focus on grades. I would focus on the effort putting forth and asking questions. Oh, you mentioned you have a science test this Friday. How are you thinking of studying for that? What might you do? Or, what's the one thing that's really important to you today that you want to get done? I like that question better than do you have homework? I think it helps kids to kind of think about their priorities for the day. Do you recommend that? Any tips for when a young kid attempts to do anything else, snack, sing, stretch, besides focus on tasks like homework? This is a good question. And we see this a lot with young kids where they are just really difficult and they will try to distract themselves from doing the work by doing other things. And I might say, I can tell this is really hard for you. First of all, I may not help that much with the work, to be honest. In fact, there's been a couple of studies that show that the more parents help, which is so counterintuitive, the more they help with doing the work, the lower the kids' grades are. And that's because kids don't like it. It affects their self-esteem. They start to think over time that they can't do this on their own. So you probably are not doing that well. But if your child is really distracted like that, I would say, look, I want to help you get started. You could use a timer. How about you work for 10 minutes? Work as hard as you can, best as you can, focus as much as you can for 10 minutes, and then you take a 2-minute break. And then if your child's giving you a hard time, I'd say, you know what? I'm going to go over here and do my email. I'm going to do stuff for work. Let me know when I can help you again. Because it could be that there's so much friction, your child is using it as a power tool almost. And you're kind of in the middle of this power struggle. Kristen, do you recommend that kids use a paper planner, or what is the best way for them to keep to-do lists like homework as well as daily tasks or special tasks? And do you recommend that kids organize their paper and different subjects in their backpack? Okay, so paper planner, if they want to, we try to figure out what are they willing to do. It's kind of like in the stages of change. You know, if we dictate you should use a paper planner, that you can bet that's not the one they're going to use, or they won't use one at all. So I would kind of try to be a detective and say, oh, what have you found that's helpful for you? Um, a lot of kids also use Google Keep. We've had lots of success with that, where it's kind of like like Post-it notes. That's been really, really successful with kids. So I would ask, what do you like? And then do they have to organize papers in different subjects in their backpack? I really like the accordion folders, and like in the 80s, they were trapper keepers. There's newer versions of them. So a lot of kids don't have a lot of papers anymore. But if they do, I would get an accordion folder and make sure each tab is labeled with a subject. And, even if your kid takes all their papers and crams it into their folder without filing, it's okay. On that once a week, when maybe that Sunday session, when you're planning ahead for a week, that could be the time where they file their papers. But, I wouldn't get too involved in that. I might, say, could this work for you? It might or it might not, and see where it leads you. My second grader often says, I forgot, and thinks that's okay. What is appropriate response? Well, Marguerite, it depends what he's saying I forgot about. Is he forgetting all of his work? I would absolutely talk to the teacher. And I might say, if this has been going on for a long time, like if it's happened just for a few days, I would, it's probably going to self-correct. But if you've seen that this is a pattern, I might say, would it be helpful if we talk to your teacher together? I want to understand what's happening at the end of the day, that so that we can make sure you can get all your things together. So I might make him part of the process and figuring out, kind of being a detective to understand what is being forgotten and is there a better way around it. Thank you. How do you make Common Core standards American education interesting for a kid who believes, for example, 4 phases of matter do not matter? Oh my gosh, we hear this a lot, especially in math, like Pythagorean theorem. Why do I have to know this? It's so dumb. I'm never going to have to use this in real life. And our answer is, you're right. You might not want to, but the Pythagorean theorem is going to get you a good grade in this class. And I know grades are important to you. And I know from what you've told me about, about your passion for art, that you're going to want to go to college. So that Pythagorean theorem is a means to the end. You're right. We'll empathize with him. You may not know how to need to use this later in life, but it can get you to the place you want to be later in life. I use positive enforcement, but probably stress deadlines with more pressure than I should. Yeah, it's easy to do, and with deadlines, it's so easy. Like, you need to have this done by Thursday at 8. Or like, you need to have your homework done at a more reasonable time by 9 o'clock every night, with kids that are staying up really late. And sometimes, we can work on deadlines with kids, but sometimes it's that the start time isn't really the best. And it could be that, like, starting a little bit earlier can get you to that deadline. So with kids that we work with, we'll figure out what's a good start time for you for your work. It could be sometimes they're just starting a little bit too late. Tatiana, it's okay. You can go. Thank you. I'm glad that you thought it was great. Kara, my son will complete his work, but often rushes through to get to something else. How do we encourage quality over completion? Kara, this is extremely hard to do. And what I found over time, that pushing it's really hard to make a kid care if they don't. And we can do our best to make them, when we say do this over, it's not good enough. Or, a sentence has more than 3 words. Where are your vocabulary words? You spelled all of this wrong. But I would generally leave the quality to the teacher. And you can even talk to the teacher about it and say, hey, I like using the words I've noticed. I've noticed Jimmy rushes through his homework. Do you have suggestions for us? I don't want to get overly involved in his homework. Feel free to, you know, talk to him about the quality. I had this experience with my youngest son, and he's 20 now. I think he was in third grade. He had to do this Pueblo Indian project, and he had like 2 weeks to do it. And we broke it down and, did all the right things. And of course, he says to me a few days before it's due, "Oh, Mom, don't worry, I've got it. This is only going to take me 30 minutes. Like, "Oh, Ethan, 30 minutes. It seems like it's a lot more involved with that than that. Don't worry. I know what I'm doing. It's going to take me 30 minutes. Well, wouldn't you know, it took him 3 hours, and the whole thing, he's upset, and he doesn't turn in very good work, and I'm not going to do the project for him. And I said to his teacher, "Hey, feel free to give Ethan the grade that he deserves." And he came home. This is when the kids got grades in elementary school. And he came home with I think he had like a C- or a D on it or something like that. And he was really upset. But we talked about it and said, "Oh, you mentioned a half hour. Going forward, what would you change, how you approached it?" And he was really young at the time, and it's often hard for third graders to think like that. But it was like a really good discussion on not going back, but like going forward. Maybe I'll allow a little bit more time. Is color coding a helpful tool? I know a lot of people that are uber into color coding, and they think it's really wonderful. I like it for kids. I think, in just working with lots of kids, that I'd say by and large girls like color coding better. But the key with color coding is not to become obsessed with it. Use it for what it's needed for. But that's probably about it. But yeah, it can be really helpful. Lauren says, "Oh my gosh, I use Pythagoreans all the time." Not kidding. I'm glad, Lauren. Thank you. My kid is attached to electronics like the tablet. Is that harmful? Certainly, we don't want our kids to be online all the time. And, we want to make sure that if kids are online and it's hard to get them off, that they've got these breaks in between their time where they can kind of detach from media. Maybe they go back to it later. But there's more research that's showing that, like, letting kids be on something for 3 hours is not great for them. But a better approach is, all right, you're on for an hour, you're off for a half hour, you can get on for another hour. That approach is better because it lets your brain recover, than, always being online all the time. So you could say, during homework or from 4 to 5, whatever it is in your house, there are no electronics. Now, I know that they have to use their laptop often, but maybe they don't need their phone sitting next to them. You can still control it. You can also control it at other times, like the dinner table or maybe even the car, so you can have conversations. Any suggestions to encourage the love of reading? I tried a library card, summer reading program incentives, tried reading as an adventure, even paying per book. From Desperate Book Nerd Mom. Oh, that's so cute. I have had good experiences with kids, with audiobooks, and getting kids to listen to a book. And sometimes if they're so reluctant, I don't even make them read. I'll say, "Tell me about a book your friends are reading, or what's a really popular book now." Get it on audiobook or Kindle and let them just listen to it. Sometimes you'll get lucky and they'll want to follow along. If you have a hardcover book as well, they may pick that up. And there's research that shows that kids can improve their comprehension and fluency if a book is just above their grade level by listening and following along rather than just reading it themselves. So sometimes people will say like the audio book is cheating. I don't think that's the case at all. I think whatever it takes. And I've also had kids. I have a student she's a senior now, and she told me just the other day, we work with her for college planning. And she said, "I just read a book. This is my first book that I wanted to read. That I've read books for school that I had to read, but I never wanted to read a book for myself. This is the first book I wanted to read." And it's some like romance novel for high schoolers. And she said, "It feels so good. I feel like I'm a reader now." And she's, you know, so for some kids, it just comes a little bit later in life, and that's okay too. And what are your thoughts on kids listening to music while doing homework? You know, it's honestly, it's not great, but it's so hard to take music away from a teenager because that's how they've done it for a long time. But what we know is that if it's lyrical music and they're kind of listening to the lyrics and they're doing their work, that it splits your focus. So you're studying for history and you're listening to these lyrics, obviously your focus is going to be split. So we'll talk to kids about it. Like, tell me how you study. What do you do when you study? If they say, I listen to music, how does that work for you? We'll say, oh, you know, would you consider trying it tomorrow night without music? And not asking like, did you like it? Because they're going to say no, but like, how would you equate your attention? Did you find that, you know, you were able to get more done faster? And that's usually what happens, is because your attention isn't split, you can be more productive. So sometimes it's just like that conversation. And again, being a detective. Any strategies? We have 2 more questions and I promise I'll wrap up. Any strategies? This is from Aaron, for kids who have a hard time finding or starting an activity during their free time. Often they struggle during unstructured time with anything more complex than comic books. I, you know, I would put out things that they might do. Like, you might always have a puzzle going in your house. So you might take the end of your dining room table, put out an easy puzzle, you know, not a lot of pieces. And you'll find that people in your family will kind of gravitate to it and like put a couple pieces together. It becomes like a watering hole for discussions too. I find them really helpful. So especially over the summer, I think puzzles are really a great thing to have out. If you have a child who likes Legos, put Legos out. Put anything out that you think that they might do, like the adult coloring books. All of those things are something, an activity. If you want your child to just get outside, you could say, let's take a walk together. You don't even have to talk to me. You can listen to your music. And I like that approach too. Or just leaving their bike in the driveway, you know, that might get them going as well. Somebody said audiobooks are great in the car. Oh, thank you, Kathleen. That Arlington Library has lots of great audiobooks that you can download. Awesome. Deborah, these are super useful tips. I can't wait to start using these strategies this weekend. I'm so happy. Thanks, Deborah. And Lisa said, I'm just tuning in now. Will this recording be available later? And the answer is yes, it definitely will. So it was so lovely to talk to all of you tonight. Thank you so much for being a part of our webinar. Kathleen, thank you for hosting me as always.
Thank you, Anne. I was taking notes and snapping some screenshots because I always learn some great things, even for my young adult kids. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all to each of you. We hope your kids have a fantastic school year. And I love especially Anne's strengths-based approach and positive approach to having less stress and less nagging and less, you know, feeling like you're doing battle with kids, and just more encouragement and support. So please keep in touch. I'll jot the PRC contact information in the chat again for those of you who maybe joined a little bit later. And Anne, thank you so much. We hope you'll consider coming back for another session this year.
I'd love that, Kathleen. Thanks. Have a great
Thanks,
school year,
everybody.
everybody. Bye-bye.